Shalom, shalom, peace and blessings with you, Mr. Lee Weissman. Shalom and peace and blessings with all the viewers watching this video. We're here from the charity Universal God Message of Peace, and we're going to be talking today about fear. What is fear? Why do we fear? How can fear help us? How does it cause us harm? How does it affect our relationships? How does it affect our behavior? And how can we transform our fear? Over to you, Lee
Okay.
Weissman.
Okay. Well, I think first of all, I'll deal with what's maybe kind of the elephant in the room when it comes to fear, and that is that, like all big words, it can mean a lot of things. When we talk about love is probably our best example because we use it all the time. So if I say I love pizza, and I say I love football, and I say I love my mother, and I love my sister, and I love my wife, and I love dogs, and I love all those things mean completely different things, even though I'm using the same word. And fear is very much the same way in that we use the word fear to mean some very different things, which may be related to each other, right? Because the truth is, even with the love example I gave, all those things are related to each other. It means that it's something which gives me pleasure, it's something which gives me benefit, it's something that I have an emotional connection to. They are related to each other, and yet they're different. So the same is true of fear. So at one level, fear refers to probably our most primitive uh our most primitive emotional response. Um and for people interested in the brain, your brain is kind of constructed like this. This is the oldest portions of your brain. This is the newest portions of your brain. Then it kind of folds over like that. Well, fear is experienced primarily right back here, right in the most primitive parts of your brain. And when a person is afraid, and it's of those things that basically has to which we have basically three responses, right? We have flight, and we have fight, and we have fleeing, fighting, and freezing. Those are basically the three basic responses. And fear is an incredibly useful response for dealing with the world, right? When you're walking down the street, um, the reason why the reason why things are not constantly falling on your head and you're not tripping over things all the time is because you have fear, right? And that fear motivates a lot of our behavior to kind of watch where we're going and to be careful about the situations that we put ourselves in. And in that respect, it's an extremely important part of being not just a human being, but being an animal. I mean, if you've had an experience with animals, animals also experience fear, and fear is not just that kind of fear. It's not just an intellectual experience or an emotional experience, also a physical experience. There are all these, your brain produces all sorts of neural hormones, and and your body chemistry changes in order to be able to allow you to respond to whatever it is that's causing you fear.
Mhm.
The bad news about that is that sometimes that fear is misplaced, right?
Mhm.
And so your mind, your emotions, your brain and your emotions and your body even go into a fear response to something which is really not dangerous. And that in turn can be dangerous, right? Because that becomes panic. And
Mhm.
that can be very destructive also.
Mhm.
Um, so knowing so
Mhm.
knowing how to be afraid and knowing when to be afraid in that sense of being afraid is really important. and that fear can be a really good teacher, right?
Mhm.
Because sometimes we experience that fear um, in a way that that awakens us to what it is that we're afraid of. We may experience the fear before we're actually completely aware of the danger, right?
Mhm.
That's the because we're so highly tuned.
Mhm.
We're so finely tuned to dangers. Um,
So how do we, so you're saying that there's rational fear and irrational fear. Perhaps there's fear which is real, or fear which is a delusion, it's not real, but our mind plays tricks on us and makes us think it's real,
right?
so we become afraid. Is there any type of fear which is real? What is the real fear that
Well,
we
I'm
should be
standing.
afraid of? You're saying that obviously if you're sort of, it can be helpful if we're afraid in a situation, if a tiger's there with you and you need to run.
Yes, if the tiger. Well,
Yeah.
tigers don't run, by the way. Okay, just well, no, but that's a really good example. Actually, let's take that example.
Yeah, so my question is, if a baby faced a tiger,
Yes.
having not the experience of knowing what a tiger can do, as in the baby doesn't know the knowledge of,
Yeah.
this tiger's going to kill me, would the baby be afraid? Would the baby react in the same way that we would perhaps react? And why is that?
Well, that's a good question, and that's an experiment that I'm not going to do, although it is a little tempting. I mean, theoretically, I think we could use I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know. Because honestly, I don't know like how hardwired our kind of like response to animals is.
Mm,
Um, I know that uh, I remember years ago they did some experiment with like monkeys and snakes, and apparently like baby monkeys had a fear of snakes, even though they had never had any experience with snakes. So maybe there is. But
interesting.
so I'm not sure if a baby does, but I know that what we do, that I love this example of the tiger, because what is my response? My fear response, right, when I face a tiger is going to be to run, right? That makes perfect sense because I want to get away from the tiger because it's dangerous to me. It's the worst thing you can do if a tiger's in front of you, because the tiger, once you run, then they think, oh, it's a new kind of gazelle. Okay, and this is food for me. I'm going to go run after it, and then it's going to eat you. Right. So if the tiger comes after you, what's the best thing to do? Is actually to turn off your fear response for a second and make yourself as big as possible and go like that, right? Make yourself really big. And there's a really good example where on the one hand, fear is great because
Mhm.
it tells you, oh, this is something I have to deal with. Um, but if we go with our kind of with any of our primitive fear responses, right?
Mhm.
If or at least two of them, okay? If we go with freezing, we're going to get eaten. If we go with fleeing, we're going to get eaten. If we go with fighting, we actually have a chance. Okay, at least in terms of making ourselves look bigger and making noise. I think that's so it's possible, and there's a good example. I think that's something really to be afraid of. But we also have like more subtle fears that are also real. We're afraid of being embarrassed. We're afraid of humiliation. We're afraid of um uh you know of
And
of all sorts of
uh,
social faux pas and losing our jobs and all of these things. I mean, there's so many things. People, we're never at a loss of things to be afraid of, and
mm,
so there's no choice but to learn how to manage it and
mm,
to test it.
mm. And many of us are afraid of the dark, in the physical dark, or the spiritual darkness, or the even the word darkness fears makes people afraid. Um, so what do you think from a spiritual perspective, the darkness represents, and how can we not be afraid in the dark? What can
Well,
we
I think part of the listen, some part of the darkness is our own kind of lower self, right? I mean, there's that darkness.
what
Uh,
do you mean? What do you mean by the lower self?
well, the parts of us that we might want to disown, right? I mean, there are parts of us, our angry, our more angry self, our more lustful self, our selfish self, right? There is that, and sometimes we're afraid. Sometimes we're afraid of that.
In
Uh,
what way are we afraid of it?
well,
And
we're afraid of what's afraid it's going to do. We're afraid of how people are going to respond to it. Afraid how we're going to respond to it. We're afraid before God, and that's. I'll get to the God part soon because that's a little bit of a different.
well,
Then we come to a whole different different set of issues, um, but
I
also
think that's fascinating.
a
I
big
think that's
part of things.
go on,
But
sorry. Oh, I think that's really fascinating how you say we're afraid of the darkness as in the lower self, because um that's perhaps somebody who's spiritually um feels connected to God or the creator might be afraid of the darkness in that sense. However, one could also see it from the other perspective and say, well, I'm afraid of the higher self, and I'm afraid of the side of, the higher side of myself. So somebody who's already in that sort of lower self and who's experiencing, within their own anger and their greed and their envy and ego, could it be that they're afraid of facing the other side of themselves, which is the higher
yeah,
self? Oops.
yeah. Well, that higher self that sometimes, you know, that sometimes has the form. Think of a conscience, right? Of a form of a conscience. It's something which could be very, could be very scary, right? That now, I think sometimes we confuse. There are two different things. I mean, we have we have we have righteous judgment inside of us, and we have unrighteous judgment inside of us, right? So inside of us is a righteous, imagine a kind of righteous judge, right? A legitimate conscience that kind of will look at have ourselves will encourage us to look at ourselves and say, okay, so is this really what you want to do, or to feel guilty, to feel a sense of shame, or at least a sense of guilt. Let's use that word for the moment, guilt. And then there's also an unrighteous kind of judgment where we judge ourselves for things that are really undeserving, where and those judgments come from maybe not such a great place. And I think people are afraid of both of those, right? And don't know the difference between them, unfortunately, right? So, and that's, I think, part of it is to know, when am I, I've seen people who are, religious, who have beaten themselves up so badly about things that just don't make sense to beat yourself up about, because they kind of have like a false conscience. But a real conscience, that's something to pay attention to, and it's important to pay attention to it and to become sensitive to it and to distinguish between, what's my, you know, to use, I don't know, it's a good word to use. What's my kind of almost use the word neurotic. What's my kind of neurotic um uh judgment on myself, and what's my legitimate judgment on myself? And I think it's important to judge yourself. I think it's important to like set time, and say to yourself, okay, let that let that higher self speak, and take a look at yourself, and give it its moment,
Mhm.
and don't be afraid of it, because it's there for you. because it's there for your good.
But
Um,
that's the thing. I think many of us do run away from that and try to hide ourselves from ourselves, our higher judgment of ourselves. And we it's really justice, isn't it, that we're perhaps afraid of? And could it be that if we were more just in the way that we behave, that we would fear less that higher self? If we behaved in a more honest, authentic manner, if we loved more, if we were kinder and more grateful and more forgiving and more merciful, could it be that that is the key to feeling less afraid um, from our higher self, our higher judgment of ourselves?
well, you're not going to be, if you're, listen, if you're being hard on the rest of the world, then, you're just going to be hard on yourself also in ways that are unhealthy, right? And, um, and obviously, you know, the more conscious you are of what it is that you're doing, and and why you're in the world and what your purpose is, and the more you dedicate yourself to gratitude, and to gratitude and to love, and to all and to all of the better ways of dealing with the world, the the less the less frightening your daily judgment is going to be. Imagine you're going to court every day, right? Well, if you're going to court, if you're going to court with a big rap sheet every day, then that's going to be very difficult. But if you're going to court and you say, okay, this is, and also like, if you become, the more honest and sincere you are, right? You can come to court, and you can say to your inner judge, right? Or you can say to your inner judge, you know what? Yeah, I did it. You know what? I'm not perfect. I'm not perfect. This is what I did. And uh
Many of us are afraid of taking that responsibility, aren't we? Of standing
absolutely.
up. And we're afraid of what people think about us. We're afraid of being mocked and ridiculed and judged
Right,
falsely and
right.
ashamed. And we're afraid of being true to ourselves, really. And because it's a frightening thing in this world, isn't it? When it feels like everything is, you know, a
Or
lot of things. There's a lot of things which appear to be um, unjust in the world, and it frightens people to face that. And and then I think we get anxious, and our body tries to tell us that there's something wrong, and we get anxious and afraid, and but
Mhm.
really it's just perhaps we hold the ability to be able to come out from that. But how do we find the courage to be more authentic with ourselves? How do we find the courage to confess our mistakes and to turn away from them and turn back to facing our higher self? How do we do that?
Well, I don't have a lot of good answers to that, but I do have a few. I mean, I think maybe the first thing is to get rid of, I think a lot of people have the secret fantasy that really they're supposed to be perfect.
Mhm.
And I think that that's very unhelpful.
Def-
Um,
I agree with you.
it's very unhelpful. To think that really I'm supposed to be perfect, and that the fact that I'm not perfect, the fact that I make mistakes, that's the first problem. And that's not a problem. That's that we were not created perfect. Okay. God is perfect, and we are not, and we will never be perfect. And that's not
So many of us think that that's what everybody wants from us. So maybe that's why people pretend to be perfect sometimes. And actually, it's okay not to be perfect.
right. There's
It's
no
okay
point. There's no point in pretending, because
not be
sooner or
perfect.
later you'll get found out. Okay, right?
Yes.
You'll get found out, or you'll find out for yourself. So, so you can get rid of that one. So I don't have to. So I don't have to worry about that one, right? That's the the fear that somehow or another I'm worse than everybody else, that everybody else is really perfect and I'm not. Why aren't I perfect? And I should be. And okay, that you know that can go, because that becomes a very big obstacle. Um, and also to be able to look at yourself honestly and understand that this is a really, really imperfect world. It's a really imperfect world full of imperfect people. And if you messed up, that's part of what you're here to learn. It's part of the educational process of being a human being. We were put in a challenging world. In the creation of in the creation story, right? We start out and we're in the Garden of Eden, right? And everything is hunky-dory, right? And we're just reaching up and grabbing the fruit off the trees and eating the fruit, and everything is great and we're having a good time, right? And under those conditions, it's very hard to make a mistake, is it, right? But we made a choice, okay? And we could talk for hours and hours and hours about why that choice was made and why the choice was offered and why did it happen that way. But the bottom line is we don't live in that world anymore, okay? We don't live in a garden where we reach up and we pick up the fruit and no, we have to, right? We live in a world of challenges. And that became part of what it means to be a human being. What it means to grow and develop as a human being is to be in this world of challenges.
And many of us are afraid to face those challenges. We're afraid of loss of health, of wealth, of lives. We're afraid of pain and suffering. When actually, what you're saying is we have to face these challenges, and actually through these challenges, we learn and we grow, and then we return in a way to our former state, perhaps through reflecting on these challenges and through appreciating wisdom which is present within those challenges in a hidden way. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, right. And really to think that's not those are not things to be afraid of.
Mhm.
I saw a woman the other day, and I wish I could remember her name because I would like to give her credit. She's an elderly woman, and she's really elderly. She must be in her 90s, and she was giving a TED talk. And I'm sure somebody in the comments, in the comments down below, you can tell me who this was. And Jewish lady, actually, and she was giving a TED talk. She said she was like 90 something years old, and she said she had terminal lung cancer. And she could hear the sound in the audience. She says, "Don't make that sound." She said, "You know what?" She said, "It's okay. I'm okay with it." I said, "I don't know why people are afraid of dying as if like they don't know it's going to happen, you
Mhm.
know?" And I think that there's so many things like that in our lives. We know that sooner or later we're going to get sick.
Mhm.
It's a fact. Sooner or later you're going to get sick. It's going to be something or another, right? You're going to get sick. Hopefully you're going to get old, right? Your beard, you don't have a beard, but if you had a beard, maybe it might turn gray. These things are going to happen. You're going to have obstacles. You're going to have stuff is going to happen. You're going to be one day in your life, some small stupid thing is going to happen that changes a lot of things. That happens all the time. This is part of what life is. Little tiny 1 second, right? I remember tripped and in 1 second I broke my knee, right? I tripped, broke my knee, and that like changed my life for months and months and months. Went this cast and having to do things this way and that way and whatever else, and couldn't drive my car and had to get someone to drive me. And I developed new friends because I had people driving me around and all these things. That's what life is. That's not the interruption to life. That is life.
Life, yeah. Many of us are afraid of losing the control over our health and, the control of not knowing really. And I think it's the unknown that we're very afraid of, the unknown parts of ourselves. and not knowing, what tomorrow is going to bring, not being able to control the weather, not being able to control everything, that can cause fear. Not being able to change the past. And many of us get lost in these fears, and then we become incapable of functioning in our normal
Right?
day-to-day lives. So what advice can you give to people to try to come out of that, so that we can be more present in the now and the moment we're in at the moment?
I think we can learn how to do, reality checks. I think part of it is checking realities. First of all, are we in the present? I think that's one of the first problems, right? Am I in the present? Am I actually responding to a situation in the here and now, or am I responding to a situation in the past? I mean, very often, something reminds me of something that I experienced in my past, and I immediately am responding as if it were the same thing,
Mm.
right? And so first thing is, okay, am, am I in the past or am I in the present right now? Okay. Is that really the situation? Right. So, is it a tiger or is it a pussycat? It might be a pussycat, but because I was attacked by a tiger before, it looks,
In this constant
pussycat,
battle with our mind, which tells us one thing,
right.
and the actual true reality of the situation, which, you know, I guess we will never really know. Will we
Well,
ever know? Can we ever know? Because surely, there is no reality other than God from our perspective, our understanding. So, but how can we really know?
we can check. I mean,
Yeah.
we can check with ourselves. We can also have systems in place to help us check out. This is why this is why it's important to have friends who you can really talk to.
Mhm.
So you can say somebody actually called me last night. They were experiencing some questions about at work, and they had gotten an email, and they're trying to understand, is this email, is this something that sounds threatening, or I have to worry about my job? And I kind of looked at the email and said, well, from my non-fear perspective, because I don't have a lot of fears attached to this, it doesn't look like that at all. It looks like completely reasonable. Looks like completely reasonable. And that was a pretty good way to check the reality of things. And that person was able to say to themselves, oh, I'm bringing a set of fears to this that maybe don't belong here.
This
And
changes our perspective on reality because of our fears, doesn't it?
right.
Yeah.
Oh, completely right. And it's a very powerful shaper of reality. Right? Fear is extraordinarily powerful at shaping our perspective of a situation. I mean, you can a person who's fearful can
Mm.
walk into a room of friendly people and feel threatened by them,
Yeah.
right? Because their past experience is telling them, when I walk into a room full of people, it's a dangerous situation. And so this poor person is really suffering, can be really suffering,
Yeah.
um,
I
even
know.
though there's no actual threat.
And during COVID, I think, it raised a lot of our fears. It brought it up to the surface. So many people became afraid to go out, to, the fear of the unknown. Our plans kept changing. So from one week to another, places were closing. We had to cancel things. And so many people became afraid. They had to stay by themselves. They didn't like being by themselves because they were so used to being distracted by friends and family and work and all of these things. So it all came to the surface, really. So how can uh, faith in a creator, in something higher than ourselves or our own understanding, something higher than our own understanding and our own mind's eye, if you like, the way that our mind interprets things, how can our belief in something higher help us to overcome our fears through surrender to a higher will?
What's interesting, I think, is that in the religious language of the Abrahamic religions, fear has a very strange place. Because it's used, and this is true for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. All three of them have this idea of fear of God, right? This fear of God. Hebrew, it's yira. In Arabic, probably taqwa is probably the closest translation. But we call it fear. We call it fear. We call it fear of God. And yet we mean in different contexts, two completely different things by it, and that are related to each other and different, and both create and solve different problems. So the first one, the kind of, and I would, my, my kind of worldview puts it kind of at a lower level, but I'm not sure that that's really reasonable. So take that with a grain of salt. Is the idea of fear of punishment, right? The idea of fear of punishment, that the anxiety that I want, I have to do this because this is something that God asks of me, and I understand that there are consequences that if I don't do it, or if I do something that I know I shouldn't do, that there's going to be a negative consequence to that. And I don't want to dismiss that at all, because I think that's a very powerful motivator of good behavior. And the world desperately needs good behavior.
Well, the thing is, you can't, if somebody, sorry, just 1 minute. So if you say to a murderer, love your neighbor, it's, is it possible for them to just suddenly, somebody who's used to killing people or lying and cheating and is it possible for them to just suddenly go to becoming selfless and being able to experience the love for their neighbor? I think fear is probably a stage that we have to go through in order to, this is my understanding, to get to a place of love where that love is inside us, but it's just sometimes, clouded over. And the only way to break through the shell, which covers our hearts, sometimes is through fear. And what the fear does is that it stops us from at least not causing harm to people.
Right.
And once we turn away from, doing wrong, then we can look at doing the right thing, as in like doing more good. Once we stop causing harm, then we can look at doing more good. But to stop time, sometimes fear is necessary to stop us from doing that.
It's a very basic kind of broad spectrum form of moral reasoning, right? And truly, it's like the scaffold that leads, it's the first step of the scaffold that leads to everything else. Obviously, we want, why do I want people not to kill? I want people not to kill because they love their fellow human being as being in the image of God, as being God's greatest creation. And how could I possibly displease my creator by killing something so beautiful, so amazing, so wonderful that I love, right? That's what I would like. But to get there, right, we may have to start first with don't do it.
Exactly.
Because if you do it,
and we can relate that onto our own lives and how we, deal with our children, and our students. Sometimes we have to, and even the courts of justice, in our societies, we have punishment, and it sort of is necessary sometimes in order to help prevent people from doing wrong. But it's obviously it's not ideal. If we could not have that, then that would be great.
we see
But
with our own children, right? I mean, we want our kids, we want our kids not to raid their refrigerator in the middle of the night not because they know they're going to get punished, but because they know that it's not really healthy to raid the refrigerator in the middle of the night, right? Because they know that it's not a good thing to do. It's not good for their health. Because based on their values, we want them not to raid the refrigerator at night, not because they think, right?
Of course, but it's so hard to, if you smother people in love all the time and kindness, they can sometimes take the mick out of that and take, it can do them harm rather than actually, a bit of strictness and discipline is essential. And actually I understand it as we do it because we love. So perhaps God puts in that fear element because he loves us. And in fact, I'm sure he does.
Right.
But
Right.
that's how I see it, is that he we have the punishment and the fear of heaven. It's all there because he loves us, and it's actually beneath that is mercy and kindness, and it's just because of our human nature that that's what we need in order to return to that love.
Or that's
And
what we see, or
sometimes
that's
interpret it. So just like a child might interpret a parent being strict as my parent doesn't love me, or my teacher doesn't like me because I got a detention for being naughty. We might interpret things
right.
differently.
And this is like a subject for another day, but I heard from Professor Omid Safi that Cornell West once said that justice justice is what love looks like in public, right?
Mhm.
And that we think of justice as being something which is strict and which is somehow harsh. Um, that's somehow harsh, but he says, but really it's kind of but it's a manifestation. It can be a manifestation of love, especially in the public realm. When we try to provide, a just, fair society, that involves a lot of strictness and effort, right? But its basis is love.
So you
Um,
see that the when we're advised from an Abrahamic perspective to fear God and fear heaven and fear God. Could that mean what we should be fearing is justice and recompense and repayment? Because the one who, as I was saying before, the only reason we would fear that is if we were not just. If because really the truth is that that is a part of us and we judge ourselves. My understanding is that it's part of us, our nature, that we are in others and others are in us, and we are just, the way we treat others is how we fear maybe that we will be treated. So maybe that's a healthy fear, in order that we can treat others with more kindness and respect and gratitude
Right,
and
it can be, right. I mean, that all those, it's important. It's it's important to have, if the fear is something which motivates you to do the right thing, right?
Mhm.
And then that can be a healthy fear. And if you have a fear that isn't getting you to do the right thing, right? Then that fear has to be in some way elevated, right? Then you have to take that fear and you have to take that fear and you have to do something with it in order to elevate it. So for example, if I'm afraid of, let's say I'm afraid of social situations, right? I have a fear, I have a fear of social situations. And I detect that's not gonna do me, it's not gonna do me a lot of good. I have a fear of the judgment of others. Um, I can elevate that by saying, okay, so like whose judgment really matters? Is
Mhm.
the judgment of these people, of the people who are going to be in this room, what really matters? Or the judgment of my creator? That's taking that fear and elevating it and taking it and say, okay, I know the feeling, I understand the feeling. Let's see if I can take that feeling and I can now use it for a different purpose.
Exactly. So like if something causes you to be afraid, maybe we should not do that to other people. Or if if somebody is oppressing you and making you feel afraid, then
That for
maybe
sure.
that we shouldn't do that to others. And perhaps within our fears, whatever it is that we fear, there is much wisdom that if we reflect upon and if we question and if we seek truth and wisdom and higher knowledge, perhaps then that can give us the ability to transform that fear and to reveal that underneath that fear is actually courage. Because how can we be brave if we do not fear? How can we actually learn to be brave? How can we learn anything without the opposite? So even fear is there in order to teach us,
To be able to face it, right? I mean,
be able to face it. Yeah, exactly. And
yeah.
to be brave, because if there was nothing to frighten us, then we wouldn't need to be brave. We wouldn't need to. But if we're not brave, then how can we take that leap of faith? How can we take that next step into the unknown, that leap across, if you get to the end of a mountain, there's a cliff, and your brain's saying to you, no, you'll never make it if you take that leap. But
Right.
your heart says, no, actually, no, I'm brave. I'm going to try my best. I'm going to take that risk, and I'm going to put my trust in God, and I'm going to take that step, and I'm going to get to the other side.
Yeah. And I think if you manage fear and you elevate fear, you can get to that. And people, all these classical, religious texts and so on talks about the kind of the fearlessness of faith, and that fearlessness doesn't mean that doesn't mean the person doesn't have fear. It means that the person has taken that fear and elevated it. So it's no longer the fear, it's no longer the fear of the trivial, right? It's now the fear of what matters, and that's much different. I think next week, I think we naturally divide. I think next week we should talk about the other kind of fear, which is that awe fear, which is that'll be much more poetic. So next week, everybody can expect it's going to be much more poetic. We'll talk about the other kind of fear. Talk about awe, and so next week, awe. So make sure to come back and like it down there and comment down there.
Thank you. God bless you. Thank you, Mr. Lee. Shalom.